Wavelength.
You know, Adelaide has worked really hard over the last few years to build a small bar reputation. When I was a kid, the big night in Adelaide was kind of, staying at home and watching the bill.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide.
As a female Sparky, I did get lots of comments on my gender.
You should be having...
Here to make a difference. Yeah, make the difference. Give the youth a voice.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having with Zane and David.
I'm looking forward to those days of sunshine, Zane.
Oh, I can't get enough of it. I'm really angsting for proper summer.
I know. But we've got a big show tonight. We've got an amazing live guest in.
Yes, multiple live guests technically, because Arj's going to join us later in the show to talk about our big lead discussion, and we have a very special guest in to talk about our first thing.
Fantastic. I cannot wait. But today everyone's talking about how rules around distracted driving could soon be overhauled, with lawmakers looking to loosen the legislation for the first time since smartphones were introduced. The proposed changes would allow motorists to use a mobile phone while driving, so long as they are mounted in a dock. And prominent AFL figure and legend from St Kilda, Danny Frawley, has been killed in a car crash near Ballarat this afternoon. Frawley played 240 games from 1984 to 1995 and captained the Saints from 1987 to 1994. And it looks like Cameron Ellis-Yeoman is set to join Hugh Greenwood and Alex Keith in leaving the Adelaide Crows next AFL season.
I'm not sure about the phone in the dock thing.
No.
Because I feel like I would still be very distracted.
But we all use phones in the dock already, don't we?
Well, I don't, because I just can't quite handle it.
I'm just outing myself as a criminal live on radio.
Tonight on the show, how do we address mental health problems within men? We speak to experts about the alarming statistics around males and mental health and share some advice for you if you're struggling. And next, Tammy Franks joins us live to discuss the bill before Parliament which could decriminalise sex work in SA. I cannot wait to get stuck into that convo.
Massive.
Wavelength.
Last year we spoke about whether we should decriminalise what is widely believed to be the world's oldest profession, sex work. We spoke to the Sex Industry Network, as well as some preeminent academics about why decriminalising or even legalising sex work would have some serious advantages, especially for sex workers. Here's a quick recap if you missed that story.
Wavelength.
It's one of those areas it's considered reasonably controversial, I guess, and people have views about sex work where they might consider it to be immoral or not desirable.
There is such inequity with sex work in comparison to any other employment. There's a lot of stigma, a lot of discrimination. It should be nobody else's decision on what somebody else does for a living. I just want sex workers to be treated like everybody else, for us to be treated like everybody else, for there to be equity across the employment sector.
Wavelength.
Since that story, Tammy Franks from the South Australian Greens brought a bill to the South Australian Parliament in an attempt to decriminalise sex work. The bill has recently passed the upper house of Parliament and is set to be discussed in the lower house any day now. We are now joined live by Tammy to discuss the passage of that bill. Welcome to Wavelength, Tammy.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for coming and joining us.
Tammy, the bill to decriminalise sex work passed the upper house in July. Can you please explain to listeners roughly what that means and what the next steps would be before we potentially look at a decriminalisation of sex work in SA?
Well, Parliament's are slow beasts, and when a bill passes Parliament, it has to not just pass one house, but the other house as well. Mm-hmm. So it can start in either the lower or upper house. In this case, we've passed a bill to decriminalise sex work through the upper house. 2/3 of the upper house voted for it, 1/3 voted against it. So that's a pretty good start. And what it does is anything related to our current laws around what is called prostitution currently are removed from the criminal code. And it also provides some protections for sex workers through equal opportunity provisions, return to work, so work cover, workers' compensation, a safer worker environment, and in the upper house, it had a few amendments made to it around some restrictions on advertising. So, sorry, Fresh FM, you won't be able to advertise sex work.
I'll let the sales director know.
You won't be seeing billboards or TV or radio ads, but other forms of advertising will be allowed. Mm-hmm. Minors were already prohibited from engaging in sex work, but you won't be able to work, say, in a commercial sex premises if you're under 18.
Okay, so there's a distinction, I guess, between decriminalising and legalising sex work. This is decriminalising, effectively, isn't it?
It is decriminalising, and that doesn't mean deregulation. Mm-hmm. It actually means all of the laws of the land apply to sex work as they do to every other type of work.
Right.
And, you know, we have a whole range of different industries that are subject to different codes and practices and regulations and so on, and all of that will spring up once sex work is actually legal to do and we know what we're dealing with as an industry.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that, Parliament is a slow beast, but the fact that we even got it through the upper house is quite monumental, because a lot of things just don't even pass a single house of Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's in front of the lower house. How confident are you that it's going to pass?
Well, here's the good news for those who do support the decriminalisation of sex work. South Australia actually has the oldest laws in the country. We've had 13 attempts in the last 2 decades or so to try and upgrade and update our archaic laws.
Mm-hmm.
None of them have been successful, which is quite disappointing. But we're in the early part of a new government. We've had a cultural change in the Parliament as well, whereas in the lower house, you only used to get 1 or 2 hours a week of private members' business, and that's where this bill sits, in what's called private members' business.
Right.
And the rest of the time was government business. Now, the upper house of the Parliament, we have unlimited private members' business in the evenings and afternoons every Wednesday that we sit. That's a cultural thing in the upper house, that we have that luxury. But we've got it to the lower house now, where we have a government that's willing to debate these things and not shut those debates down. Previously, we've seen these bills stalled and backroom deals done to never let those debates actually see the light of day and get to a vote. We'll get this to a vote. And we're nice and early in the parliamentary schedule to make that happen. But not only that, we've got Labor Shadow Minister for Women, Katrina Hildyard, and the Attorney General, Vicky Chapman, as the other co-sponsors of the bill. So Vicky and Katrina have done their speeches, and come the 25th of September, it'll all be back on for the debate.
To have a member of each major side of Parliament backing in a bill from the Greens, like that's the 3 major forces in our Parliament, at least having a representative behind this bill, which is quite incredible.
It's massive. I mean, you must be feeling quite confident then.
I am feeling confident that we will get a result of some sort this time, rather than the bill sit there and never be debated. Now, this is also a bill, though, that had its origins as the Michelle Lensink, now Liberal Minister for Human Services bill in the last Parliament. And we passed it through the upper house there, but we never, with Steph Key, Labor member for then Ashford, in the lower house, we could never get it to a vote, unfortunately, because there was what I call the Christian Taliban who controls the whipping in the previous Labor 16 years regime, the Labor right, and very driven by Christian morals, their version of Christian morals, controlled that whip and that spot, that hour that I was talking about on a Thursday morning, where you would see private members' business debated, and they would literally move motions on, you know, I don't know, toe fungus and no, seriously, but they would move motions on all sorts of extraordinary things,
the
just
real
to
issues,
talk down the clock. So that filibustering that you see.
Yeah.
Now this time people can get up and talk for as long as they like, but this is going to go to a vote, and that's pretty good news, I think.
Great. There has been a little bit of resistance in the press from other members of Parliament, though. David, which you're a little bit more researched about, so I'll let you have this question.
Yeah. I was reading about how Labor member Claire Scriven was quite a vocal opponent of the bill, and even tried to, I guess, change the name of the bill to calling it about prostitution rather than sex work. What can we make from that kind of pushback from some members of Parliament, especially when you say that you've got the backing of certain Labor members anyway?
Oh, look, it's no secret that Claire Scriven is reasonably opposed to this legislative reform. She's opposed to referring to sex work as sex work. She refers to women who are prostituted as if women have no choice in the matter, and as women don't understand their own minds and their own bodies. She also called this the Pimp Protection Bill, but didn't quite define what a pimp was, although I think she kind of was reasonably across, 70s midday dramas in her version of what a pimp might be. Certainly the cottage industry of South Australia, we're not really seeing an extraordinary number of people coercing other people into commercial sex services to make a profit out of them. Now, sure, we might have people who work in a brothel who have an arrangement with the people who run the building, who maintain it, who change the linen, who do the rosters, who ensure the bookings are done. That's a pretty standard transaction that most people would experience every time they go get a haircut, really. It's a very similar business in many ways, and some people might be there with their own chair and have their own clientele that they specialise in, but they have the admin and the premises, and others might just work for that particular hairdresser and take whatever bookings come through because they don't have their own client base, and it's a very similar situation. And we don't really equate pimps with, the person who manages the hairdressing salon.
No.
Do we? Yet that is actually what we're talking about here. Like many of us in politics as well, we enjoy things like, well, I don't, but some of them do, drivers, and certainly we all have people to answer our phones and
hotel rooms,
sort out our diaries and make some bookings for us and do our admin. Now, are they our pimps? I mean, if you translate the thinking there,
yeah,
that is what we're talking about.
Maybe you should start calling them that and see how far that goes.
Jokingly, I have.
Yeah.
It's become a bit of a running joke, but really, like, nobody gets through in business completely doing everything all on their own. We have web designers, we have Ubers, we have taxis. Like, somebody will do a design for us for an ad that will run perhaps in the Tiser. I don't know if you've noticed, but we see sex work advertised in the Advertiser every single day of the week. So there's a crime going on in the back pages of the Advertiser that isn't really being reported in the same way in the front pages of the Advertiser at the moment.
Wavelength.
Thank you very much once again, Tammy, for joining us. Is there anything in this bill that you wish you could have included?
As the debates unfolded, we've actually seen quite an extraordinary level of policing of sex work that we hadn't seen until the bill passed in that last parliament. There's been a 20-fold increase in the policing and charges and sort of court activity.
So that's since July?
No, in the last couple of years.
Right,
so
okay.
Since that first hurdle where Michelle Lensing's version of the bill passed the upper house, you sort of go from the 1 year there was 11 charges, convictions, etc. The next year there was 211.
Right.
And the new crime that started popping up, because we have the crimes of keeping a bawdy house, B-A-W-D-Y. I don't know if anyone even knows quite what a
interesting
bawdy house
adjective
is.
for
Being on a premises frequented by prostitutes, receiving money or in a brothel, managing a brothel. Now, a brothel, by the way, currently under the law can be defined as one single room. It's not some two-story mansion, Texas style, bordello thing. It's under law. It's that, but as well as a woman in a single flat, exactly where she lives. Taking a few regular clients once or twice a month. These are all defined currently as brothels for the policing. But the new charge that started coming in was this one of money laundering. And one woman I know who has actually got convictions now for money laundering was 30 years in the industry. She had fines for being on a premises or managing a brothel before, but she got pinged for money laundering. And she was, it's quite a technical thing, but it was a new policing tool. It certainly sounds a lot more sinister than straight out sexual services being offered in the brothel that she'd been working in literally on and off for decades. And she now can't even deliver Uber Eats because she's got this money laundering criminal conviction. Now, that's the one I would actually say most people we're looking at having spent convictions in this case, but she's under our bill not going to get any joy with those money laundering convictions that she now got because she had an FPOS machine on her premises.
Oh.
Right.
So new technology has come to bite her on the bum a bit. But as I say, she now can't even get a job doing anything. As soon as that criminal check is done, money laundering comes up. It sounds like she's a super mastermind criminal to any prospective employers. And she's the most lovely woman, mum, daughter, 50s, was in this industry most of her working life. And now she's got this money laundering conviction that really, really doesn't look great on paper for her and has restricted her ability to to work. So that would be what I would change. And I'm hoping, I actually have raised that in the debate, and I'm hoping that if people do accept that sex work should not be criminalised, and that we do have those spent convictions provisions so that former charges, as homosexual sex was once criminalised, and we have had spent convictions for that. If it was adult consensual sex and a crime and a conviction related to that, she should be able to go to a judge, I think, and argue her case to have that considered and to not have that on her record anymore.
For sure. I remember, just on the topic of the increased level of policing, when we did this story, David, at the end of last year and did the big investigation, and we had someone who was a sex worker call up and talk about at length the pressure that she was under from the police. So it kind of seems that, like, as this issue has gotten more and more attention, perhaps the policing of it has increased as well.
It absolutely has. And we've got reports at the moment. It's quite extraordinary. Lots of covert operations. So a plainclothes man going in, and as I say, it might just be a woman in her own home who uses that as her commercial sex business. He goes in, and as soon as there's an exchange of an arrangement of money for a service, 6, 7, 8 cops come charging through the door. And you have to think, this is not good use of police resources. It doesn't reflect what say are their priorities. But we know through the Sex Industry Network and through our networks having put this bill out for public feedback and passing it through the Parliament, that is actually what's going on with SAPOL at the moment. And I had them confirm that to me in a Budget and Finance Committee hearing recently, and I've just got some stats back on that. So one of those operations takes the leading officer 6 or 7 hours at least in terms of their policing time. Now, I, for one, would think that those people who are in the police force would be better off actually attending to calls of domestic violence and robbery and what I would call real crime, rather than going in undercover to entrap a woman, usually in her own home or potentially in a brothel that's literally been running for decades with, no great nuisance to the neighbours or no harm to anyone, and undertaking adult consensual sex, but for the exchange of money.
You mentioned before that it's not hard to find classified advertisements in very well-known newspapers, magazines and stuff for these services.
Yes.
So how is that able to get through is what I want to know, if the police or are they using those ads to find them?
They are not, as far as I can tell, using those ads to find them, because I look at those ads day to day and year after year, and quite often it's pretty obvious, and I've done a list now, it's pretty obvious where the brothels are in South Australia.
Right.
They advertise. They're online, they're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, and they're certainly in the Tiser and other regional papers when people come and tour. Sex workers operate in a range of different ways. So they might do call-outs and they might go to the client. They might go out as an escort for the evening, go to a movie, and then return back to their own home. They might have a granny flat out the back that they use for these purposes. They might book a hotel. Surprise, surprise. Strangely enough, people do have sex in hotels from time to time.
Shocking,
or their own homes.
Whoa.
Or, in rooms where the door is locked.
I'm going to need to see evidence of that.
Pretty much this goes on all the time, but where that money is exchanged, of course, we're seeing that undercover operation taking up valuable police resources and time. And yet those ads in the paper run day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And some of those premises, as I say, they've been there 20, 30 years and they're not shut down, and somebody's owning those buildings, somebody's renting those buildings, and somebody's using those buildings. I do have to question police priorities when I see that in operation. And as a community, there's no great moral uproar about those classifieds in the back of the Tiser.
No, I've never heard anyone complain about them.
I'm sure you've heard. I've heard a few people complain about them, but by and large, general member of the public knows that this happens, and if it doesn't hurt anyone, they really don't think that it should be taking up police time.
Yeah, the thing about those police operations, though, you mentioned how I guess they're obviously very costly to the taxpayer, but I just can't get over how intensely humiliating and traumatic that must be for a woman or a man who's just trying to do their job.
Exactly right. No, and particularly for the workers that I've spoken to, they have a range of safety tactics that they use. They will screen callers, they will check numbers, they will ask for ID, but now they also have to live in fear of the police being the ones banging down their doors and breaking in. There's some CCTV footage, actually, of one of those raids that we shared with the ABC recently, and it's just extraordinary. 6 or 7 big burly blokes in the public sector, in the police force, barging in, little screen door and confronting and surrounding a single woman in a very vulnerable position, which is just... I really do question that use of police resources, and I'm sure anyone who's ever rung the police for a domestic violence incident, either directly affecting them or on their street or with their neighbours, and not being given the due attention that those things deserve, would have to question those priorities as well.
Absolutely. Tammy Franks, thank you so much for joining us, and we will keep you all listening up to date with how the bill to decriminalise sex work progresses through our parliament, whether or not it becomes a reality over the next few months, years. I don't know how long it might take with our parliament,
months. Let's say this year.
Tammy Franks, thank you so much for joining us.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
We start this week with the news that the Tamil family at the centre of a growing political storm will be allowed to stay in Australia until at least the 18th of September. The family is currently on Christmas Island, with the case deciding whether they can stay set to appear in the federal court next Wednesday, although the final decision could take even longer. Meanwhile, the government's once again planning to have welfare recipients drug tested. The government says it'll help identify those with drug issues and help to get them job ready. However, Labor reckons the government should instead help welfare recipients by raising Newstart. Switching to old mate Peter Dutton now, who says another federal police raid on an intelligence officer wasn't an attempt at intimidation. The AFP has already raided the home of a journalist and also the ABC headquarters earlier this year, with Minister Dutton saying the AFP is professional and simply has a job to do. And finishing off in SA, Premier Stephen Marshall reckons the state does not have an unemployment issue, despite us having the highest jobless rate in Australia. He says instead we've got a positive economic trajectory, and that we've also actually had an increase in employment. And that's what the hell's going on in politics this week.
I find that quite hard to believe. You are listening to Wavelength. Thank you, Andrew, for letting us know what the hell is going on in politics at the moment. You are with Zane, David, and Arj joins us in the studio now. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, guys. Good to be back.
It's fantastic to have you in because you have taken the lead on the story we're about to get stuck into, which is looking at men's mental health. You've spoken to a number of experts about, some of the alarming statistics and why there's such a particular problem that's very unique to men and mental health.
Yeah.
I personally can't wait to get stuck into this.
Yep. No. It's a really personal story to me in general. Just because I know myself and a lot of guys, we don't take good care of our mental health. We're really bad about that. So it's kind of something I wanted to talk about a lot. And I just recently done a charity ride. I did that yesterday. So me and about 400 other bikers, we did a ride against suicide. We raised money for a charity called Silent Ripples that does counselling and work with people who have lost someone to suicide. So, yeah, it's a really important story that I think needs to get out there.
Wavelength.
Please be warned that we are now about to discuss some issues around mental health and suicide, so feel free to tune out if you're not in a place to listen to this conversation. And please, if you need assistance or help, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
On average, 6 out of every 8 suicides in Australia are men. That's according to Beyond Blue, and according to Men's Line Australia. Men are far less likely to seek professional help for mental health problems. So how do we address these statistics and get men seeking help when they need it? I just spoke to some experts to get some answers.
Wavelength.
Mental health is one of the most important but neglected parts of our well-being, and unfortunately, men have a long history of ignoring it the most. I sat down with Tim Danzy, who's a psychologist, to talk about this issue, as well as reps from Batia and Headspace.
So I've seen a huge shift in the mental health of men, and probably over the last 25 years, I've really started to notice it. And I think there's been some positive changes, but there's certainly some changes in health that we really have to address. And I think one of the biggest things I see is the outcome of poor men's mental health, which is a very increased rate of male suicide. So that's a huge problem that we need to look at. I do think we can only look at what are some of the possibilities, and I do believe that it's men's inability to open up and communicate and actually say, I'm not travelling well. Have the courage, I guess, to say to their mates, yeah, I'm not going well, or to make that initial consult with a doctor to say, look, I need some help.
Do you think it kind of stems from, the previous notion of boys don't cry?
Oh, yeah.
That kind of mentality?
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. My generation were brought up, we were to be tough and masculine and male, and you weren't allowed to admit that you were finding things difficult. You had the old classic stiff upper lip, and it was seen as a sign of a weakness that you weren't going well.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between someone who has a mental health illness and someone who's just taking care of their mental health well-being.
Your mental health illness is a diagnosed condition. So if we talk about depression, so with depression, one thing I do think we have to do is get the language correct around what depression is. I see a lot of young people who tell me that they're depressed, but what it is, they're not actually depressed. They're sad about something, or they're experiencing grief. Depression is when people are feeling sad and flat over a period of time. So we look at, certainly I always say 4 to 6 weeks of feeling the same way. Same with things like anxiety as well. So they are a diagnosed mental health condition. All right, and to go through that process, you go to your doctor, GP, and have a chat, and might refer you to a counsellor or a psychologist. So that way we can actually, as a psychologist, we can look to see what we can do to help, and whether it is potentially something we can sort out very quickly just through changing your behaviour, or whether we do need to look at some long-term support for the depression. So that's to me your mental health condition. Mental health well-being is what we want to improve, and we need to improve this in men. We need to have more people actively trying to improve their mental health well-being, and that is just through a set of behaviours which just make you feel a little bit happier about yourself.
Now, I found that with men in particular, and I know this within my own social group, is we tend to resort to a lot of really negative coping mechanisms.
Yes.
Such as turning to alcohol. What are some more positive ways of coping with, a particularly bad day?
We'll go a bit further than just one bad day. I always talk about the 5 secrets of happiness, and I'm a big advocate of teaching all people, but really focusing with our young men and older men as well. There's 5 things I reckon if you can put into your week really just help. So exercise is the first one. I'm very big on people exercising. You think when we exercise, we release endorphins, we feel good about ourselves. Exercise also gives us an opportunity to mix with other people, to socialise as well. Second one, I'm big on people learning. So learning something new, stimulating your brain, learning how to cook something, grow something in the garden, watch a program on television that's educational. So you're learning stuff, read a book. There's so many things you can do now which I consider to be learning. Number 3 is hang around with positive people. I always say that we all have friends that I call the dementors. They just suck the goodness out of you, and you walk away and you just feel exhausted. What you got to do is find the people who give you energy. When you walk away, you just go, oh, how good was that? 4th one is give. And that means doing little things for others without asking anything in return. Giving compliments, but just taking time to acknowledge people, talk to people, say hello to people, smile at people. And the 5th one is take notice. So you look at, walking through town this morning and going, gee, it's a beautiful day. It's overcast, but yeah, it's a lovely day. And just seeing people actively doing things and acknowledging the good in the world, finding the good. And that's hard because we get bombarded with so much negativity. So if you can slot those 5 things into a week, I think that's a good start.
Wavelength.
Arj for Wavelength, speaking to a psychologist about mental health issues within men, why there are such alarming statistics, why there are a disproportionate amount of men doing things like not approaching assistance for mental health and the very alarming suicide statistics as well. Arj joins us in the studio. Thank you for joining us, Arj.
No worries.
Some incredible advice at the end there. I thought a lot of those are very, very good tips just to maintain good mental health. What did you make of those?
Well, yeah, I really wanted to focus on the difference between having a mental health illness and taking care of your mental health well-being.
Yes.
Because actually, the vast majority of people who take their own life, it's not always from depression or anxiety. A lot of it is men who feel really isolated, they feel cut off, they don't have a support network, and there's just a cascading of series of events that eventually they hit a breaking point. And because they haven't been able to take care of their mental health well-being throughout it, then they reach this point. So stuff like exercise, for me, that is one of my big things. I need to hit the gym every now and then, or I just feel flat. And also the last one of like taking notice of something being a good day, that for me is a big one. So I always try to find one thing at the end of each day to like, yep, that was good. So sometimes it's just taking a really nice long bath and being like, yep, solid.
Love a good bath. I think they're so underrated. Yeah, and I think the thing about learning new things as well, whenever I get myself stuck into funks, it's very hard to even think about watching something different on Netflix or reading a book or going and doing something, listening to a new podcast. You know, you kind of just want to default to comforting things that you know. You want to watch the same season of like Will and Grace that you've seen so many times before.
Or destructive habits too.
That too.
Which can
much
also
worse.
be really bad.
Much worse. So I'm curious to get people's take on this. Why, or rather, how do we address mental health problems within men? How do we make sure that our men are approaching professionals for help and approaching their friends for help? And how do we curb some of these horrible things that are happening to our men who aren't seeking help when they need it? 1300 73 73 74. We're going to enter into this discussion a lot more up next, and also let you know what's going on in sport at the moment.
What the hell is going on in sports at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
As always, we kick things off with football, and we are almost at the pointy end of the SANFL season, with the Adelaide Crows bouncing back from their showdown hiding last week to eliminate Norwood 139-77 on Sunday. Meanwhile, Port Magpies are through to the grand final after holding off minor premiers Glenelg in a hard-fought 4-point victory. The final score was 76-72. Glenelg and the Adelaide Crows face off this Sunday for the final spot in the decider, so make sure you get down to Adelaide Oval and support your local. And to more local action, and the Adelaide Footy League finals continue this weekend with Divisions 2 through to 6 playing out across various locations around the state, so do make sure you get online and check out where your team is playing and go out and support local footy. To the cricket, and Australia have reclaimed the Ashes with a 185-run win at Old Trafford overnight. The win is the first time the Aussies have retained the urn on English soil for 18 years and sends an ominous warning to their rivals as ex-captain Steve Smith continues his Bradman-like return to the game. And over to tennis now, and Serena Williams' Grand Slam final nightmares continue as she was upset in straight sets by Canadian teenager Bianca Andreescu 6-3, 7-5 on the weekend. Meanwhile, on the men's side, Rafael Nadal has claimed his 19th career Grand Slam and is now within touching distance of Roger Federer's elusive 20 Grand Slam title record after defeating Russian Daniil Medvedev in a 5-set thriller overnight at the US Open. And lastly, a Chinese aquarium has been blasted by animal lovers after it decided to stage a weekly football match in one of the giant fish tanks. Staff at the Tianjin Aquarium in northern China defended the decision to stage a series of underwater matches, saying that it was a bid to promote people's interest in the underwater world and encourage visitors to see the huge variety of animal life available. And that is what the hell is going on in sports at the moment.
Wavelength.
Tonight we're asking how we address mental health problems within men, so please be warned that we are going to discuss issues around mental health and suicide tonight, so feel free to tune out if you're not ready to listen to that conversation, you're not in the place right now, and if you need assistance, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
In part 2 of his investigation, Arj spoke to 2 prominent mental health organisations in Adelaide about what support men can access and tips for those who may be struggling.
Wavelength.
So I'm joined by Alex from Batyr. Tell us a little bit about Batyr before we get started.
Batyr are not-for-profit, founded back in 2011 by a guy called Sebastian Robertson. He was a bloke who was at ANU, he was captain of his college, a very good sportsman in rugby and some other sports, and great, doing great academically. Unfortunately, what a lot of people didn't know when they looked at him is that he was facing a battle behind the scenes, and he was fighting his own demons in terms of having some mental health struggles. And unfortunately, not feeling that he could really talk about it or reach out, he attempted to take his own life. Coming out of this, he really wanted to make a difference, make sure other people didn't have to go through the same thing that he went through, and he really wanted to get rid of that stigma surrounding mental health. So he founded Batir. We go around to high schools, universities, workplaces, really trying to smash that stigma surrounding mental health and encouraging young people to reach out for support. We do that by storytelling, by having people come in and share their stories of how they worked through their mental health and came out the other side.
So how have you found that in terms of dealing with the stigma around mental health?
It's really hard to do because it is so ingrained in society, and it's something that really the younger generation are beginning to tackle and be more open about, which is great. But we found that it's something that almost everyone goes through at some point in their life. Lifetime prevalence is extremely high for mental ill health. It's just people don't talk about it. So all we do is try and start the conversation. It's why our logo is an elephant. We're trying to start talking about the elephant in the room. You know, everyone's going through it or knows someone's going through it, but no one talks about it. And, you know, when you share a struggle, you really lighten that burden.
So why do you think there's such a stigma surrounding mental health, particularly in men? Like, we don't seem to have this stigma when it's attached to going to the doctor because you had the flu or because you've had an injury of some kind, like a broken bone or whatever. But when it comes to mental health, we seem to have a real hang-up about going to go see a counsellor, going to see a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and reaching out for the support services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make such a great point, Arj, in talking about going to see a doctor for your physical health. Your mental health is just the same. It's just, you know, I feel like people haven't been raised in that way. Part of the stigma surrounding mental health is that it's weak. And I think that, you know, the traditional view of a man is this strong individual who does, you know, isn't overly emotional, doesn't explore their feeling a large amount. And I think that traditional view of a man really shines through in our culture, particularly in Western society. And it's a tough thing to shift, but it is one of those things that I think being vulnerable is a true strength, and people are starting to realise that.
Here's Dan from Headspace for a quick chat. So what are some of the issues that men face when it comes to their mental health?
Well, mental health issues for men and women are quite the same, experiencing the same sort of prevalency, dual standards, depression, anxiety, very common both amongst men and women. However, the issue that we're seeing with men are much less likely to speak out about their mental health issues, much less likely to go and receive help from a counsellor or speak out to their friends and family, perhaps due to the stigma being raised, particularly in Australia, with you know, big macho culture, not wanting to speak about these things. I'll be right, she'll be right, mate, and that's what we're seeing, and that's really what we want to change.
So when it comes to developing a support network around your mental health, what are some of the things that you would advise men in particular to do and look for?
Well, really start with those who you trust the most. People you've had a good rapport with or known for a really long time, friends, family, and perhaps even some professionals as well. Speaking to your GP, adding your GP to that support network can be really beneficial, but also looking into other services. You know, you may not ever use them or want to need them, but looking to services like Headspace, Beyond Blue, private counsellors, or anything run by the South Australian government when it comes to taking care of your mental health. Just sometimes being aware of these services and at least knowing that they're in your back pocket, so to speak, could be really beneficial. I just encourage all men listening to speak out about your mental health, particularly if you aren't having such a great time. You'll actually be surprised at how much support you get. Speaking from experience, I've reached out to mates plenty of times when it comes to not feeling so great myself, and you'll actually be surprised at how much it makes you feel better and the support you'll get from the people around.
Wavelength.
That was Arj chatting to Batir and Headspace, two mental health organisations based here in Adelaide, about how we address mental health problems within men. You are listening to Wavelength with Zane, David and Arj in the studio, who you've just done such a good job taking on this story, by the way, and it's such an important conversation to be having.
Yeah, no, it's an important conversation, I think, and we really need to start normalising talking about mental health.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest problems, because men, we view it like, okay, if we got some mental health problems, then we need to like put up or shut up, because we're afraid of people thinking we're weak, of thinking we're crazy, and that's just simply not the case.
We were talking before off air as well, like, Arj, you do some crazy stuff in your life. You have one of the most interesting lives of anyone I've ever led. And yet it's this stuff that is objectively more dangerous.
Well, okay, yeah, I do a lot of really dumb, risky things. Like, I do boxing, I snowboard, I ride motorcycles, and statistically and literally the most dangerous thing for me to do is not take care of my mental health. I could ride every day without a helmet and smoke 2 packs a day, and not taking care of my mental health is more dangerous.
Statistics not quite verified, but I believe the general gist of what you're saying.
So I think we just need to start breaking down some of these barriers. When I went on the Ride Against Suicide, so we've got some really big blokey blokes there. Like, I'm talking full leather clad, Harley Davidson, face tats, the entire works. And we've got these guys there, and they're talking, and they're honestly saying how their culture of man up, don't talk about it, is killing men. It's killing us. And it's one of the most dangerous mentalities that we have about this. So I really want guys in particular to start reaching out for help, reaching to their friends, letting them know we're not okay. Even for just small stuff. Like, I'm having a really stressful time at work. I'm having a really stressful time at uni. Because it's the small little things that then build up every day that sort of bring you down.
Yeah, it's like, I've had it explained to me before how, like, if you have a glass of water, like maybe like a couple of drops of water in there, that like they might be small things to you, and at the time they don't really impact you, but eventually that cup's going to fill up and it's going to spill over.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about.
That's a solid analogy.
Yeah.
And it's like the longer you hold that glass of full water, the heavier it gets. Like you try and hold your arm out straight for a minute, you're in pain. You hold it out for 10 minutes, you're shaking.
Yeah. I'm glad as well, just a final note, that we got Alex on from Batyr. He's someone who I'm also quite familiar with because I've done a bunch of events for UniSA, emceeing, where they inevitably have a stand there promoting all kinds of really cool mental health activities. He's just a really good dude, and I think there's something to be said for men like him. There's something to be said for men like the ones who did the ride that you went on over the weekend, actually having men, really masculine men as well, take charge of this issue and encourage their mates to talk. Because often, like, I feel like a lot of that hesitation to talk and that hesitation to admit you're weak comes from a perception thing. You don't want to be perceived as weak by your peers, Yeah. As dumb as that assumption is, that's completely incorrect, but that's the assumption I feel a lot of men have.
No, I think without a doubt. I think it's a really, and people hate this term, and there's a lot of backlash against it, but there is a problem with toxic masculinity. And there's a difference between toxic masculinity and masculinity. You can be masculine, you can be into beers, cars, etc., and you can still be vulnerable. And I think Alex made a really great point, is there's a real courage in being vulnerable.
Yes.
And it's something that I struggled with for a long time, well into, honestly, like, probably last year was when I started seeing a counsellor, not regularly, but, maybe once or twice every 4 months or so, just at uni, the free one. And it really helped. It honestly did.
Yeah, those services, like you just mentioned, they're so available as well. So if you are experiencing something, please reach out to someone and talk to someone, your GP, the counsellor at uni, whoever your mates.
Yes.
Yeah, get the help you need, because it is amazing.
And if tonight's conversation has affected you at all, if you feel like you need to reach out to someone, Lifeline is there to contact on 13 11 14. Please give some love as well to Headspace and Batyr for being part of this story with us and taking some time out to chat to us. We're going to wrap it up there. The come up is about to get stuck in. Thank you, Arj, for joining us.
No worries. If I could just mention one more thing very briefly.
Very briefly.
Also try and recognize when your friends are in trouble, because sometimes it's really hard to peg it. And we know celebrities like Chester from Linkin Park or Robin Williams, where they look like they're traveling well, but they're really not. So check in with your friends and actually just go beyond just the, oh, hey, yeah, how you going? Actually go, no, honestly, mate, how are you? Are you okay? Like, what's everything going with you, mate?
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful note to end on. Search Wavelength on your favourite podcast app if you want to listen back to this conversation and share it with anyone. We are going to jump out of here. We'll be back next week to spark the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Wavelength.